But to me, Steph's not going anywhere right now. But if you're starting to consider how to make this team better, then maybe down the line it becomes more reasonable. Not right now. Like, I don't think, to me, the Warriors have not considered trading Steph Curry. Okay, so if they start to consider trading Steph Curry, that still means we're probably 9 months to at least a year away from even doing something like that.
No, I agree. You can't do it, but the first step in anything is talking about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that both a local, being Scott Ostler, and a national, being John Hollinger, writer, both brought it up around the same time because everyone's looking at this roster. And Steiny, I mean, you guys have talked about it. Me and Goo did last week when you were out. There's just not many options for this team if you do want change. I mean, we've discussed how to shake this thing up, but do you bring Clay back? And I mean, at the end of the day, it's funny because at the deadline, Shams Charania brought up the fact that the only person who's safe on this roster that you can't trade is Steph Curry.
Right.
Well, naturally, and looking ahead, looking down the line is, well, if this team is no longer a playoff team, if they're no longer a contender, well, then everything has to be on the table in a sense, because that's generally what follows. Like, for example, they're not in the same category, and the championships are what makes this conversation kind of, a brick wall for a lot of people. But there are teams every single year that have to reconsider their place in the association, and they have to think about trading their star players or moving off of this guy or who not to extend. And when Steve Kerr said a few years ago that this is the real NBA, well, we're starting to see this is the real NBA offseason. That these are the choices that people will not necessarily make, but discuss. And before, this was a non-starter. This was off the table. This was taboo. This was, you do not talk about it. Right. But in 24 hours, we've seen two people bring it up. And I don't think that noise is going anywhere if the Warriors are in the same position this summer as they were next summer.
Yeah. 888-957-9570 is the number. Scott Ostler, respected columnist here in the Bay. He brought it up, but listen, we've gotten texts and we've gotten calls over the last 3 or 4 months from fans who think this team maybe is past its time of winning titles, and the best way to get back on track would be to move Steph Curry. I don't think we're there yet. We're also going to get into the NFL draft. We got Ricky Williams today at noon. One of the most dynamic running backs in the NFL. I looked at some of his numbers, man. He's still, he was considered a little bit of a disappointment, but he's still 29th all-time in rushing yards and was part of one of the most historic trades in the NFL. So we're going to talk to
that's why you also got to go look at his college numbers. That's why people believe he might have left some on the table.
6,700 yards, I think, at Texas.
The dude was unbelievable. In fact, I want to ask him how much he thinks he could have made in NIL.
Oh, boy.
Dude, Ricky Williams.
You got to be careful about that because apparently his first contract wasn't
great.
No.
Come on, Ditka.
It wasn't a great contract.
It moved heaven and earth for him. He traded an entire draft for this guy. He couldn't even give him a decent salary.
Well, hey, 49ers are going through it with Ayuk right now. We'll find out we'll talk about Brandon Ayuk too. Listen to some of what John Lynch has to say. The other thing as we bring up Steph Curry is, and I think it's a challenge with every player who's getting up there. But with Steph, I do think it's different, and that is this. How does a great player age? Because you've got to figure out a way for that great player to age within a winning environment. Like when Tim Duncan got to be 37, 38, 39, he was playing 25 minutes a night. And he had a certain role, and he didn't have to be the number one option. The one challenge I see with Steph right now is he's still the best player on the team. And it's not really even close. So if he's the best player on the team, but he's declining, but he's still playing at a really high level, it just complicates things. Like, how close are we till Steph starts to come off the bench, do you think?
I don't think
we're at least a year or two away.
Yeah, I don't think we're close to that.
We're not close to that. So, I look at Kobe Bryant.
In fact, if he plays for the Golden State Warriors, I don't think Steph is ever coming off the bench. Even if he's playing 25 minutes a night, you're going to hear his jersey announced. 30, Curry. He's not. I don't think that would happen.
I look at how Kobe Bryant went down to the Lakers. He didn't make the postseason in any of his last 4 years. One of those years he was hurt, but he didn't. The Warriors have to be very careful. I guess what I'm saying with Warrior fans is, is it fair to consider it? And here's what I'm thinking, because I don't think, look, nothing's happening right now, but to me, you call Steph Curry in, and it's Steph, and it's cooler heads prevailing. It's Steph sitting with Joe Lacob and Mike Dunleavy. And you start having a dialogue. And I think if you're Mike Dunleavy and you're Joe Lacob, you have to look at Steph and say, Steph, we can try. We can have the best intentions. We can try to make every move under the sun this offseason. We can go further into the tax if we have to. We can cost cut if we have to. We can try to get a big boy if he's out there. If he's not, we can go in another direction. We can bring Clay back. We can not bring Clay back. We can think about Draymond moving on. We cannot think about Draymond moving on. But you know what? The odds of us being a title contender next year, Steph, you see it. We see it. So what do we want to do here? I think that's the conversation that has to be had. And then you have to listen to what Steph Curry says. It's one thing when Steph tells the media, hey, I just want to win. All right, well, maybe that's going to mean we have to do some things that you don't want to do. And is that okay with you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, what's Curry's breaking point? I don't think we're even close to being there yet. And I think that's kind of the point of the articles or the conversation, the dialogue is, like, if Steph says he wants to retire a Warrior, you do everything to make that happen.
Right.
That's just the facts. Like, you have to do that. But the question I'm curious if people, I don't know, want to broach is, what does it mean to people to have a lifer? Because right. Duncan's I guess, the ideal lifer, which is, I think he made the playoffs each of the last 3 years of his career. At age 40, he was playing 25 minutes a night, but I think the team still got to the second round. They were 2 or 3 years removed from a championship. Like, that's the ideal route. But you take a look at Kobe Bryant. I don't think Kobe Bryant made the playoffs the last 3 or 4 years of his career.
Right.
Dirk Nowitzki, the other big lifer from our generation, did not make the playoffs his last 3 years in Dallas. And Dirk's got 1 championship. Kobe's got 5. Steph's got 4. Duncan's got 5. These are the guys that we're talking about in regards to one jersey beginning to end, and 1 out of the 3, and potentially 1 out of the 4 is the only one that went out on top.
Right.
And Duncan didn't even win in his final year. They still had a steady decline from winning the championship in 2014 to when Duncan eventually retired. And then the Spurs were left in, relegation land.
Right.
So how does Curry view this team, to me, is the question that he needs to ask himself this summer. And if it's still, if his allegiance is to the Warriors and to that building and to the brand, well, then by God, you got to make it happen. But if you're talking about the conversation between Dunleavy and Lacob and Curry and all the rest, and there's some semblance of, I'm not so sure, well, right. Then I do think that these pieces or these things that are being written are not off. Like, these are the beginnings of conversations that are going to happen probably for the next year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or 2 years.
Absolutely. And this is interesting from the YouTube chat. Baby brother, if I'm and I got the retort for you, baby brother. If I'm the owner and someone in the front office suggests that we look into possibly trading Steph, I'd fire them on the spot. Yeah, that's not what Joe Lacob does. And the fact of the matter is, I believe we have an owner here in Golden State that wants to know every single possibility under the sun. And I think I'm in the minority here, but I don't know. I think nothing's off the table for Joe Lacob. I don't think he wants to trade Steph Curry, but I absolutely positively believe that if Joe Lacob thought he could move Steph Curry and come out of it on the other side better in a shorter period of time than he could have imagined, in a better financial spot than he could have imagined, and at a better competitive spot than he could have imagined, I actually believe Joe Lacob would do that, because I think he is at his core a businessman. And yes, Steph puts butts in the seats, but Joe Lacob, in my mind, has a confidence about him that he thinks he's going to get somebody after. And I'm not saying he can't, but I think he thinks he's going to get another superstar after Steph leaves here, and they will win again. And it won't be as long as people think. And that's one of the reasons we love him, but it's also one of the reasons that I don't put anything past Joe Lacob in terms of what he might or might not do. Like, we can't talk about Joe Lacob being one of the biggest risk takers of any owner that we've seen in the Bay Area and then not think he won't do something bold. That's what we love about him. And that's another reason why I think this is a topic of conversation. And I do think there's something, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but there is something about Steph being here before Joe Lacob that's, to me, the last thing for Joe Lacob to check off on his box. And I don't think he wants to start it right away, but it's going to be, can I win after Steph leaves? That's the last thing Joe Lacob has on his box.
But Lacob's also smart enough and understands basketball enough to realize that, like, you do kind of, like, you do owe your franchise player whatever he wants. I mean, Lacob grew up, what, a Lakers fan? Or was it Celtics? Celtics. So, I apologize. But there are marquee players throughout the history of basketball that have been owed certain things that don't necessarily get to call the shots in regards to the roster, but they do get to dictate their future. Like, Steph Curry gets to dictate his future with the Warriors, and that's why I don't think, for as much of a killer as you know him to be, and I guess I've started to learn, I don't think Lacob is someone that at this point is bringing up that subject with Steph unless it's brought up first. Like, I think that these reactions we're seeing today about should the Warriors consider it are just based on the avenues they have available to them, which it does appear if you trade Curry, you're moving into a full rebuild and you're trying to recoup a massive amount of draft picks and all the rest, and you're kickstarting this franchise from zero. But if you don't, how can you realistically improve it around Curry? And what we're starting to find is, at least right now, before July 1st, when everything opens up, there's not a lot that the Warriors can realistically do, either because players on their team don't have value, they're too old, they're overpriced, or they're too young, and they're not enough assets in regards to talent or young talent that can go fetch you something worth basically giving up your future for, when your future already looks like it's a little bleak. So the conversation about Steph to me is as much about, yes, I mean, would Curry want to do this? What does he want? He said he wants to win. I think he wants to win in Golden State.
Sure.
I don't know if the Warriors believe that for the next 5 years, like, Curry's going to be, well, he'd be in his 40s, but for the next, I guess, 4 seasons, I would put him at 40. How many playoff appearances do you realistically think you can get Steph Curry? That's the question they got to ask themselves. And if they think that they can get 2 or 3, well, then maybe you do lean in on the last 4 years of Steph's greatness. I don't know.
And and I'm looking at the Xfinity mobile text line, and this is 408. You don't sell your golden goose. Joe Lacob's not an idiot. A businessman won't get rid of Steph ever. Okay, like,
that's a good point.
I have a retort for every definitive statement, and it would be this: I thought Joe Lacob just wanted to win. I thought winning was the most important thing to Joe Lacob. Like, if winning is the most important thing to Joe Lacob, then he believes that if you win, he'll sell out the building. The building will sell out if you win. So if Joe Lacob looks at this team and says, well, we're not really winning. Yeah, the building sold out because of Steph. Sure, I think he's got to start thinking, well, I guess we could still sell out the building as long as Steph's here. But what happens when Steph's not here and you might have nothing in the cupboard? Then are you selling out? I don't know. I don't think so. But, I get it. He's a businessman, but he's also given no indication that he wants to do anything other than win at all costs. And maybe that makes Curry a casualty down the line.
I don't know about casualty, but I do think the 408's onto something. Yes, Joe wants to win, but he also understands where the Warriors are, who they are, the brand they have. And I do think that's valuable to him as well. The fact that they have Chase Center and they are seen as a marquee franchise. The reason why they're a marquee franchise, and Lacob has a big part to do with that, but it's because of Steph Curry. So in a way, I think you do set yourself up, unless you have another golden goose in your back pocket, or a golden goose you think is going to be that guy. I just don't see how you can make that move, because if you're wrong, there are far more ramifications to me, Steiny. If the Warriors decide to, for example, trade Steph or move off of Clay or trade Dre, if they go somewhere else and win,
right,
and you're still stuck in mediocrity or worse, a lottery team for the foreseeable future, like that's worst case scenario. And that deflates your brand. That decreases what people believe the Golden State Warriors are, in my opinion. I would look at them differently. And the last place that Lacob wants to be is where they were when he bought the team, which was irrelevant.
Right. No, you're right. You're right about that. 888-957-9570 is the number. Look, the bottom line is we're going to see it, and we're going to hear about it more and more. Scott Ostler, San Francisco Chronicle, wrote about it today. Is it time to start thinking about maybe the unthinkable? It was in John Hollinger's story in The Athletic. And it's always under the caveat, well, they probably won't, but if they want to, they could. Meaning trade Steph Curry, or think about it. And what's striking me is we've gone from never in a million years to, well, it's something that they theoretically could consider. Well, my feeling is if you're just starting to consider something, it's still not going to happen for quite a while. But, I'm looking at this, and after taking in all the information, maybe the Warriors simply bring Clay back at a fair number. They let Chris Paul walk. They try to use their taxpayer mid-level for a backup point guard, and they come back next year and try to win 50 games and be in the top 5. And if that doesn't work, maybe next year at the trade deadline we're in a different spot. But it does feel like everybody's kind of throwing that out there about Steph Curry, and I think it's the longest of long shots. But I think the owner here in Golden State is just the kind of guy who has shown us that he's willing to roll the dice.
I also think, too, it's, why are people writing these things? Why are they suggesting that this could be a possibility? Why are they doing that? Excuse me. And to me, it's because there's not much else left. Like, there's not much else left to evaluate, to figure out how you can go up. The Warriors have been going down since they won the championship. Second round team, didn't make the playoffs this year. So how can you reverse course? Right. And an option has to be kickstarting or restarting this thing. I don't think that's the one they fall on. And in fact, we can talk about it on the other side. I do think that we're more likely to see the same version of this year's team with a couple of minor adjustments next season than not. And the reason is because I think of what was brought up today and written about today. Those are conversations and questions that people don't have answers to or don't want to have yet. But it's going to get louder and louder next season. And the Warriors, in a way, they have a lot of freedom because I think there's just options to move pieces to not, but they're also in the most bleak part of whatever you believe is left of